Okay, very good. I'm Brenda Kupchik, the first Selectwoman of Fairfield, and I was asked to have this meeting for your neighborhood to speak a little bit more and explain exactly the 8-30G statute, to talk a little bit, although when I spoke to some of you over the last several weeks, I explained that from my understanding, there hasn't been any contract executed or signed contracts between the Affordable Housing Corp and the owners of the property, as I know it. So it's difficult to even have sort of a concrete conversation based on what's going to happen, because none of us really know at this point. But I wanted to give you an opportunity to, and I know there was a lot of questions coming in asking about the 8-30G statute. How does that work? What does it mean? Because I myself know it very well, because serving in the legislature, I served on the Housing Committee as the ranking member and worked extensively on the statute in partnership with Mark Barnhart, who is on the call, who's our Economic Development Director, but who also works very closely with our Affordable Housing Commission and has a wealth of experience and helped me greatly while I was a legislator trying to modify the statute, which I was able to do, but it's still not enough. And we also have our zoning director, Jim Wendt, who has a lot of experience in this as well. Jim is our zoning official, but he also interacts and is working all the time with our zoning commission, and 8-30G developments come up quite a bit over the last, I'd say, 10 years in our town. And so he knows this process fairly well and what the zoning commission can and cannot do under the law, and some of the historical perspective that's happened with these types of developments in our community. I would like to recognize that I do believe some members of our state delegate, we invited our state delegation. I think Senator Wong was going to be signing on. I don't see him on yet, but I just wanted to make that, to acknowledge that. And also, one of the residents asked if our Board of Ed chairman could sign on, and I believe Christine Vitale is on the line. She's the chairwoman of the Board of Education, and also the vice chairperson of the Board of Education, Nick Asa, is also on the line. I do see the minority leader, Pam Iacono, on the line. I see your RTM members, Marissa Ringel, Frank Batiste. I see Peter Brighton, and I miss anybody, please feel free to acknowledge that you're on the line. Oh, I see Senator Wong is on the line as well. So how I wanted this to work is that I wanted Mark Barnhart just to give a small, a brief but informative overview of what the 8-30G statute is, so you can understand that a little bit better. And then I wanted to let Jim Wendt speak a little bit more about how this has worked out in our town, the examples of it, and how certain applications have gone either way, and how the Planning and Zoning Commission is restricted in many ways to certain criteria when they're making these judgments on these applications. So I'm going to open it up. Oh, we have the chairman of our Planning and Zoning Commission, Matt Wagner, on the line. He has a lot of experience with this as well. He has saw a lot of these applications over the years. So I'm going to open it up to Mark Barnhart. And Mark, if you could just speak a little bit to explain what 8-30 is and how it works.
Sure. Thank you, First Selectwoman Kupchik. Mark Barnhart, hopefully everyone can hear me okay. I'm the Director of Community Economic Development for the town. I do work, provide staff support to the Affordable Housing Committee, which has been around for a good number of decades. Not that I've been here for that length of time, but I do work with the committee. Connecticut General Statutes 830G is the state's affordable housing law. It modifies the process under which typical land use applications are heard. Typically in a land use application, and Jim Wendt, the Director of Planning, can speak to this more specifically, but typically in land use applications made before the town and its Planning and Zoning Commission, the burden of proof is on the applicant to demonstrate that the project that's being proposed complies with the town's zoning regulations or standards. In an 830G application, provided it meets the qualifications as a set-aside development or assisted housing development, that burden of proof shifts to the town or its Planning and Zoning Commission to demonstrate in reasons for denying such an application based on the evidence in the record that there are substantial interests of public health and safety that outweigh the need for affordable housing, and that those interests can't be mitigated by reasonable modifications to the proposal. There are some communities that are exempt from that provision. Those are communities where there is more than 10% of the community's housing stock that is deed restricted or recognized by the state as affordable housing already. There are roughly 30 communities in the state that have exceeded that 10% threshold. Out of 169, that list has remained fairly stable since the statute was enacted back in 1989, 1990. So it hasn't really changed a lot. Unfortunately, the town of Fairfield is not one of them. Currently, we have about 2.5% of our housing stock that is recognized by the state as meeting that requirement, that standard. So we're some distance away from eclipsing the 10% mark. There is a provision in the statute that allows communities such as Fairfield to qualify for a moratorium under the statute. In order to do so, we need to accumulate a sufficient number of points based on a formula that's again laid out in the statute. And assuming that the Department of Housing accepts that application and accepts the calculation of points, would then qualify the town for a limited 4-year temporary moratorium. That moratorium doesn't exclude or prevent all affordable housing applications. Importantly, assisted housing projects, those that are proposed by, for the most part, nonprofit entities that are receiving governmental assistance that encompass less than 40 units, are exempt, as are projects that are 100% affordable. And importantly, also, moratorium would only affect projects that are proposed after the moratorium goes into effect. So anything that's already in the pipeline, we have to consider under the statute. The moratorium, we've been making progress towards attaining sufficient number of points under the moratorium. The formula lays out basically that you need to achieve a number of points equivalent to 2% of the number of housing units in a community as of the last census. So for larger communities like Fairfield, it's a pretty high number. And we need to have accumulated 433 points in order to qualify for a moratorium. And we're closing in on that mark, but we're just short. We're about 377 points to date, making slow but steady progress, but we're still some distance away. And once we have eclipsed that mark, we would need to actually prepare an application presenting all of the evidence supporting our application and provide that to the Department of Housing for their review and ultimately their approval. So it's a lengthy process, but we should be, again, we're making progress, but we're not quite there yet. I don't know if Jim, if there's anything I missed, or you want to talk specifically as to how the Planning and Zoning Commission considers applications under the statute. We've had quite a bit of experience as of late with a number of applications. I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, Mark. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jim Wendt. I'm the planning director for the town. As Mark indicated, many of you, let me just back up for a minute. Looking at the list of participants, some of you are well familiar with participating and attending Planning and Zoning Commission meetings in the past. Some of you are not. But as Mark indicated, under the statute, basically the rules shift. Under a normal Planning and Zoning Commission application, the Planning and Zoning Commission measures that application against the standards that they've adopted in the zoning regulations. Under the 8-30G provision, essentially the local rules don't apply, and the table is basically tilted in favor of an affordable housing application unless certain standards can be demonstrated. And I'll walk, Mark touched on those a little bit, and I'll walk through it. But just to back up for a second, an affordable housing application, a set-aside application to qualify under the statute, a development has to have at least 30% of the total number of dwelling units deed restricted for a period of 40 years to be below market rate. So if there's a development that proposes at least that threshold of affordability, then the statute applies, in which case the commission cannot measure the application against the standards that we've put forth. But the statute, and I'm going to read this because it comes from the statute directly and from case law that has developed over the years, that the commission has the burden to prove if an application is denied and appealed, the commission has the burden to prove that A, the decision is necessary to protect a substantial public interest in health, safety, or other matters which the commission may legally consider. B, that identified public interest clearly outweighs the need for affordable housing. And C, that public interest cannot be protected by some reasonable change to the affordable housing development. We had an application, our most recent 8-30G application, some of you may be familiar with, on Beach Road. After 4 evenings of public hearing, the commission found that there was a legitimate public health and safety issue that they thought that they could consider. And in that case, the commission actually approved the application, but with modifications to that, in the commission's view, would mitigate against those impacts. So that application has been appealed. We'll see where that goes. We've had a mixed track record. As I said, the court cases, there's essentially a fairly large thumb on the judicial scale when it comes to an affordable housing appeal. We have, for example, just 2 examples from Fairfield. Is we had a case on Berwick Avenue some years ago where the commission denied the application, and the court upheld that denial on the basis that in that particular case, that neighborhood is prone to flooding. There was a documented, demonstrated past examples of emergency response evacuations, and it was shown that it was likely to occur in the future. And the court found that to be a reasonable basis for the commission to deny that application. On Bronson Road, an application that you might also be familiar with, maybe not, the commission had testimony from our fire chief that the access to that site was inadequate for a public emergency response. In that case, got pushed all the way up to the appellate and state Supreme Court, which ultimately didn't take the case. But the courts found there that that was not a high enough bar. They recognized the public access or emergency access is in fact a legitimate public health and safety concern. However, the court found that that wasn't enough, that the need for affordable housing outweighed that concern and overturned that decision. So it's a pretty high bar in these cases. Some of the issues that the courts have found that are not legitimate interests is, and I know there's concern about potential impact on school populations. That is not a factor that the courts will consider in an affordable housing application. So that's an example of a public interest, although an important one, but does not factor into an affordable housing case. Issues like sewer capacity, to some extent, although our reaction or our experience wasn't great on Bronson Road, the ability for public emergency access is a legitimate concern. There have been, since 2012, 12 set-aside or 8-30G applications that have been authorized in town, totaling 383 total units. Of those projects, 6 are complete or nearly complete. totaling 167 total units. Mark can give you has a spreadsheet detailing, and as he said earlier, we have enough approved units to potentially qualify for a moratorium, but we can't claim credit for units that aren't yet completed and occupied. So there will be a time lag between now and the time that we can apply for a moratorium, but there's enough projects in the hopper to make that qualification. So that is all I have at this point. We don't have an application yet, so I'll turn it back over to Brenda for any other comments or questions.
Thank you, Jim. I want to first recognize that State Representative Laura Devlin has joined us. Nice to see you, Laura. Okay, so what I had typed in the chat, my staff typed in the chat about asking questions, and I'm going to go to each person who asked that question, allow you to ask the question, and then we'll do our best to answer it. So if you didn't see that, there's a little chat on the right-hand side of WebEx, and you can type in your question, and then we're going to go through that order of questions. So there's a question from Audino. Would you like to ask the question yourself? I do see it, but I want to give you the opportunity to actually verbally ask it.
Sure. Hi, Brenda. How are you?
Good.
Can you hear me?
How are you?
Good.
Yes.
This is Bruce. Yeah. We were kind of curious what the town is doing proactively around this. We've heard about other towns kind of getting ahead of the ball, identifying, areas or properties that, are close to things like public transportation and shopping centers, et cetera, and working with developers to build affordable housing. And we just were curious kind of what the town of Fairfield's role or interest is in that. I think what we've seen with the other projects going around town, even with using the Beach Road as an example, is developers will just set aside, the bare minimum affordable housing units so they can, and then overbuild because they now have kind of free reign on the property due to the to the appeal statute. So you kind of play this cat and mouse game, and at the end, all we're doing is increasing the population of town, which has been pretty much saturated for the last 30, 40 years. And so I just don't know how we're ever going to get there, kind of under this current way that these projects are happening. So we'd love to hear kind of your thoughts on that.
Sure, I'll take a first pass at that.
If I could just jump in, Matt.
Go ahead.
Bruce, what the town has been trying to do, frankly, I thought for many years when I got into the legislature, I never heard about 8-30G, and then I quickly got up to speed on what it means, and then the town started to get inundated, and that was back in 2011. So I got up to speed on it, learned quickly, and just for everyone's edification, the statute is sacred to many members of the legislature, and to even suggest changing a comma in the statute is pushed back quite severely. I was able to work with Senator Wong on the Housing Committee to get some small changes, and believe me, I just want to explain to you, it took literally thousands of hours of meetings and years to actually get this small change, and there's a sunset clause on it. But to go back to what the town has done, so back then when I was in the legislature, I didn't think that the town was doing enough to try to be more proactive in building our own affordable housing and partnering with developers. But I think that the Affordable Housing Commission and Mark Barnhart and now myself have been working and trying to do that. And Mark can speak a little bit about a property that we just purchased to be able to start increasing our own stock. So there's a lot of there's a housing trust fund that the town has put into place, and Mark can speak more about that. But again, I feel like the town should have been doing this stuff 10 years ago. But here we are. And so we have been subjected to predatory development. It's been happening nonstop. And again, you're right, it's a high number to reach. And part of the problem is that when the statute took place, when it was written in '89, it didn't allow for towns that were proactive prior to '89
Right.
to build affordable housing, to allow those units to count. So for example, when Jackie Durrell was first selectwoman, she had the vision of affordable housing. It was something very important to her. And she built Parish Court, and we have Pine Tree Court. But these affordable housing developments were not allowed to be counted in our overall count, which was extraordinarily frustrating for myself and other legislators representing our town, as well as other legislators across Fairfield County. There are a lot of things. For example, there are landlords who offer affordable, which would be deemed affordable under the guidelines of income eligibility and all of that. But unless, say, for example, a landlord has a 40-year deed restriction on his property, it doesn't count. So that doesn't mean we don't have affordable units in town, but it means it doesn't meet the criteria under the 8-30G statute. So it's a complicated statute. But again, I think the town, to say again, the town could have been more proactive, and we are trying to be more proactive now. But again, we're under the gun. And like Mark said, and like Jim said, while we are not at that moratorium, those applications can keep coming. And until we reach it, for example, as Jim said, if we built every single project that was in the pipeline, we would reach the moratorium. So right now we are susceptible to these applications, and I am trying, but again, it's not an easy process to build the amount of affordable housing and get a CO on it to be able to then apply for the moratorium with the state of Connecticut.
So,
did you want to add, Matt, something?
well, from the town plan and zoning perspective, and Jim can jump in here with some more perspective on our historical efforts. But when I first joined the commission in 2009, we were already in the Commerce Drive overlay study and regulation amendments. That entire, not entire, but a major aspect of that effort was to identify redevelopment in the Commerce Drive area, which would incent mixed use and affordable development. You know, there have been many regulation amendments that we have undertaken over the years to provide incentives for developers to create affordable housing in the town of Fairfield, which is consistent with our zoning regulations, and to minimize the impact on the overall town. Most recently, we have passed the affordable housing permit fee, which created an affordable housing trust fund. And over the recent years, we have raised just under $1 million of money earmarked for the town to be proactive in identifying parcels to buy and develop as affordable housing for the town of Fairfield. I think everybody should recognize that in order for the town can be proactive in incenting affordable housing in two ways. One is by regulation to encourage the development privately, and the second is by identifying those parcels and actually buying them itself and developing them, with town funds. I think we all can recognize the pressures, the budgetary constraints and pressures the town has faced over the last, decades. And when the prospect of, raising funds to actually go out and develop those parcels ourselves is raised, there's pushback there too. Nobody wants to have their taxes raised. So, in my experience over more than a decade of being on the commission, we have actively sought to create regulations that encourage the development of affordable housing within the context of our overall zoning regulations, and we have created programs to develop funds that are specifically earmarked for the town to proactively purchase and develop affordable housing, on behalf of the town. I would encourage Jim or Mark to jump in here with some comments with respect to that.
Yeah, I can follow up with that, Matt. Thanks. In addition to what Matt has said, again, we had our TOD, Transit Oriented Development Planning effort, in is a follow-up to the Commerce Drive. And we've adopted an inclusionary zoning provision as well that requires a minimum of 10% level of below market rate units in any development in town that has 10 or more units. So the transit-oriented development projects that you see having been developed and under development around the Metro Center have a 10% level of affordability. Again, creating additional units that help get to that moratorium level. But because we are a larger, it's more difficult in larger communities like Fairfield that have a larger base number of dwelling units to get to that target number. Smaller communities that have much smaller levels of housing stock don't need nearly the number of affordable units to get to that point. So there have been a number of things. And the commission has been trying to recognize where additional density might be appropriate, again, around the train stations, to provide an incentive for developers to do more in those locations where it's less impactful to surrounding residential neighborhoods. But those efforts don't inoculate us from the potential of a development that might not be in an area that at first glance you would think would be a target area for more dense housing.
I guess there's a couple things I want to elaborate on. I perhaps should have spent a little bit of my time talking about the role of the Affordable Housing Committee, which is a volunteer group appointed by the Board of Selectmen. They're responsible for really looking at the need for affordable housing within our community to address the housing needs of our resident base, and then developing strategies to help meet that need. And they have an obligation to report annually on the progress or steps that they've taken to the RTM, which they do every year. And that information is, I believe, available through the town's website if you need to look at the annual reports. The town Affordable Housing Committee last updated its affordable housing plan for the town in 2014, and a lot of the specific measures that both Matt and Jim talked about were actual recommendations that were set forth in the plan. So what we did was develop a suite of tools to help the town meet its affordable housing obligations. And since the plan was adopted, we have created more than 100 affordable housing units in town and increased the number of points by over 220%. That's not enough to get to where we need to be, but we've made substantial progress in the 5 to 6 years since we adopted the plan. The Board of Selectmen just tasked the Affordable Housing Committee with updating the Affordable Housing Plan and allocated some funds from the Housing Trust Fund to do that important work. So we'll be working with these same groups, the Board of Selectmen, the Planning and Zoning Commission, RTM, and other stakeholders to, again, look at ways in which we can build upon the progress that's been made and hopefully get to where we need to be a lot sooner. The issue that we have with trying to build your way out of this, however, regardless of who's doing that work, whether it's a private for-profit entity or nonprofit or a town-sponsored project, from project conceptualization through approvals to financing to actual construction to certificate of occupancy for those units, which is the point in which you can actually count those units towards your moratorium. That's at least a 2-year window. So, you know, we have tried to adopt an all of the above strategy to look at our existing housing stock and figure out ways in which we could deed restrict that so it would count towards our points. But as Brenda Kupchak mentioned, only units that were constructed or newly deed restricted after 1990 count. So some of the projects that were developed back in the 1980s don't count towards our moratorium obligations. So that's an important point to make as well. So I just wanted to mention a couple of those things, but the town is aggressively trying to move towards these goals. One of the issues obviously is in order to count these units through a moratorium, as was mentioned before, you need a 40-year deed restriction. So again, that's a pretty high threshold as well.
So I just want to jump in now. I just want to make everyone aware that we started the meeting at 1 and we allotted an hour and a half for this meeting. So if we're going to try to get through all the questions that we have in the chat, I'm going to ask everybody to be more succinct, either in their questions and in their answers, because I want to make sure everyone does get their chance. So again, it's 1:30 and we're stopping a hard stop at 2:30. And so the next question,
and Brenda, I have to leave at 2 o'clock. I have another meeting that I have to attend that was previously scheduled. So if there are any questions that I can chime in on, we should do that before 2.
Paul Kiefner's next. Paul, are you still there?
Yes, he's muted.
Oh, he's Paul, you're muted. Okay, so I'm gonna ask his question. Paul Kiefner said, did Jim Wen say that overloading the sewer system is or is not an issue? Jim, can you answer that?
Yeah, that is a fair game issue. Yes, sewer capacity is a legitimate public health and safety issue that's relevant to an affordable housing application. So the Water Pollution Control Authority would have to weigh in and approve a project. Inadequate capacity would be a valid reason to deny an affordable housing application. I can jump to the next question if you'd like,
Okay,
Brenda.
I'm sorry,
There's somebody asked. There was a question.
Is it? You're good. You're good. All right. I just want to make sure everyone can hear me.
Yes.
I think we missed one question. We would like to understand the roles of the Affordable Housing Committee. I think Mark answered that just in the prior. So the next one is, what is the estimated completion date of current projects that would allow us to hit the minimum and institute a moratorium? That was Jim McMahon asking. Mark?
Yeah, I can take a stab at that, and Mark can jump in. It's really dependent on the folks that have control over those development projects. For example, the Bronson Road project, which is a 91 unit project that would have a substantial number of points, was the last court appeal that we exhausted our appeals on that over a year ago. So that owner of that property could walk in the door tomorrow with a building permit to start that project, but the ball is entirely in their court is whether or not they're going to proceed and when they do. So once a development has authorization to proceed, the ball is in the developer's court as to how long it takes for them to actually perform. So the short answer is we can't give a completion date because it's dependent on when development projects might begin.
But sorry, so this is Todd. I asked the question.
Thank you, Jim. And then,
if there's projects underway, do we not know when those are going to be completed? I mean, I'm assuming somebody in the town has some type of timeline idea of when these things are going to be done, right?
Well, once a project breaks ground, yes, it's more easy to estimate when they might be completed. But again, for the examples, we've got the largest project that's sitting out there is the Bronson Road project, and we have not heard much of anything from that developer since we've exhausted our appeals. So it's hard to give a concrete estimate.
But what about the other ones?
Well, 6 are complete. Several we know are not going to go forward. 78 Umpqua Place is probably the most recent one that's about to, probably within the next several weeks, obtain a building permit to start. So we would expect that to take about 18 months or so from start to completion. There are a couple of smaller projects that have been approved, but we don't foresee them proceeding. But Mark can correct me if I'm wrong, but if the Bronson Road project proceeds by itself, I believe that project is enough to put us over the top. But I mean, High Street is an example of a project that the Planning and Zoning Commission approved or is authorized, but still doesn't have a wetland permit. So that project is not going to move forward or can't move forward unless the wetlands issues are resolved.
Yeah, I would just say that the projects that are currently under construction, we're still probably going to fall just shy of what we need for points without some projects that have, as Jim alluded to, not quite yet broken ground, which will be in probably a 12 to 18 month construction window before they're at a point where they can get a certificate of occupancy and get counted towards our moratorium points.
Thank you, Mark. And so the next question is from Taylor Dean. What power does the community and the town have to limit the scope of the project, considering issues like sewer, water, parking, traffic safety, traffic congestion? What could exhaust neighborhood resources, assuming that the developer is able to get a proposal through 8-3G, limiting 150 units to 250 units, and trying to prevent overbuilding? And also, question is pushing back on the 8-30G appeal. Will the burden of the legal costs fall on residents to do privately, or what role does the town play in hiring and funding legal defense? So I'm gonna answer that one, and then I'm gonna let the first one for Jim or Mark. But again, we are limited into the scope of what the statute says. So it's not about us saying we don't like it, it's too big, it's too encumbrant, it's outside of our Fairfield zoning regulations. It's within, it has to impact safety. Like Mr. Wentz said earlier, one of our proposals was originally denied because a fire truck could not pull in there and turn around. So that means that's safety. People could die because of it. One of the other ones were denied because it was a flood area and people actually had to be rescued by first responders in a boat. So those kinds of things. Other than that, all of our normal zoning laws do not apply. And as far as legal defense, the town has spent a considerable amount of money, and I think Mark or Jim could speak more in detail of the money we have spent in defending denials by the Planning and Zoning Commission. So if the Planning and Zoning Commission is, in the case of Bronson Road, and maybe Matt or Jim would like to speak a little bit more about that, we did spend a lot, and we ended up losing in the end. So, gentlemen, either one of you want to elaborate a little on that?
Well, I can't speak to, I don't know exactly the cost. Oh, go ahead, Matt, if you want to jump in.
So I think the way to answer the question is which party, who is the party pursuing or defending the legal challenge. And so in the case of, for example, a Beach Road, that's a good one because there was also a community group represented by Joel Green that appeared in that as interveners. The developer in Beach Road has filed an appeal to the Superior Court, and the town of Fairfield is the defendant in that case. And so the town of Fairfield, through their outside counsel in town, James Baldwin, will defend that litigation, and the town pays those legal fees. Attorney Green, on behalf of the interveners, may also be either named as a defendant, or they can file their own papers to get involved in the case, in which case his clients have to pay his legal fees. So if they choose not to intervene, then the town defends the case, and the town is responsible for all those fees and costs. I hope that answered the question.
Thanks.
Yes, that's helpful, Matt. Thank you. The next question is from Sue Prescott, and it's Matt's comments on 461 Mill Hill as a high-density project is not consistent with zoning regulations and hurts property values. I'm not sure. I mean, I think that Matt and Jim and Mark, and I think all of us would agree that we don't want high-density projects in our town, and we obviously don't want projects that don't comply with our current zoning laws. We have zoning laws for a reason. It's we put them in place to make sure we had some control over how our town is developed. But unfortunately, 8-30G overrides all local zoning laws.
And Brenda, and thank you. Thank you for that. But it goes a little bit beyond that, in that, when we all did a lot of research, everybody in this room, I'm sure, did a lot of research when you go to buy your home, and you take a lot of things into consideration. So I don't think any of us were ignorant when we bought our house in any way, shape, or form. And we bought in our neighborhood because of the 1 acre zoning, because of the property, because of the character of the neighborhood. And this feels very much like a bait and switch, that all of a sudden, all the reasons A to Z why we chose to buy our homes is now, it could be out the window to all of a sudden live next door to 150 high density rental unit. And it hurts our home marketability, and it would hurt our home property values. I don't see how it couldn't. But it just seems like a very bait and switch, specifically for this neighborhood in this community.
So Sue, to respond to you is, I agree. This could happen to anybody in this entire town. Anybody.
That is frightening. That is frightening.
And it's why I joined my colleagues in the legislature for fighting, Fairfield County legislators fighting really hard. And just to be clear, Fairfield County is the one impacted here. This is not happening in the northeast corner of the state. It's not happening. So legislators up there just don't really care about it that much because it's not happening in their towns. So again, I completely sympathize. I fought for this thing with everything I had for 10 years in the legislature. This takes complete control away from our town. It takes control away from us as residents. And I despise the statute. And I think it should be thrown out and redone. Frankly, I don't think it really attributes to more affordable housing. I have said that for years in the legislature, that there are other ways to achieve more affordable housing throughout the state of Connecticut that doesn't work like this. But it's very difficult when you have a large majority in the legislature who doesn't agree with that mentality. So, and bottom line is votes count. So if you don't have the votes to overturn something, you can't change it. So I feel you. I get it. It could happen to me. I mean, this could happen to me in my neighborhood or anybody in this town. So we're all like in the same boat here, really.
So what do you
recommend? Go to the next.
Okay.
Sue, if you wouldn't mind, I want to try to get through everybody's questions because we do have a hard stop in 2:30, and if we have time at the end, we can come back around.
Of course.
What do we have here?
Kelly.
Who?
Kelly.
Oh, I'm sorry. While everyone is in support of affordable housing, it should not be forced upon a community at the detriment of current property owners. We just talked about that. 150 to 200 unit development in an A zoned neighborhood is simply not appropriate. I agree. And supporting and enabling development and more appropriate properties such as the old battery factory and so on and so forth, public transportation, and all of those I think I just addressed in responding to Sue. We're all here, Kelly. We're all feeling the same way, and we are all bound by this state statute, and that's kind of where it starts and where it ends to a certain extent. I'm going to go to Melanie Marks. My biggest concern is for the safety issue. Currently living in my third house on Bronson Road near the corner of Mill Hill Terrace in Bronson, next to my daughter's son-in-law and grandsons who will be walkers to Mill Hill School. My biggest concern is that there are no sidewalks leading up to Mill Hill from Mill Hill Road, and they're clearly impact the safety of everyone. Yes, actually, I think, Melanie, you had written to me a little while back, and I think Jim Went and I were talking about this, and maybe Mark, you and I talked about how we could get some, I think Bill Hurley has some funds about talking about expanding the sidewalks because of the Bronson Road project, even though it doesn't seem like it's being built anytime soon. It's still an approved project. So,
hey, Brenda,
it's
Nick from the Board of Ed.
1 minute, though. I think that we talked about adding more sidewalks, Jim, to that area, because I think that's what Melanie's question was. She's concerned about sidewalks.
Yeah, I don't think there'd be any pushback from the commission's part. The Planning and Zoning Commission is a strong proponent of sidewalks in new developments. You'd have to check with Bill, as you mentioned, Bill Hurley, in terms of what what's on the sidewalk plan and his near-term view. But I think there would be broad support from the commission to put sidewalks in any of these locations.
Right, because I remember, Melanie, of when we had communicated before, there are parts of sidewalks along Bronson. And I think I might have spoken to Bill Hurley about it, but I can follow up with you if you send an email to me, Melanie. I can follow up with you on what we can potentially do for sidewalk extensions on Bronson Road. The next one is Paul Kiefner. How long can a developer wait before starting a project such as Bronson Road? So I think the question to Matt or Jim, is there some approval deadline, or once they're approved, they can build it at any time?
Site plan approvals generally have a 5-year lifespan with the possibility for a 5-year extension.
5-year lifespan?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And the ability to achieve a 5-year extension.
And how would they do that? How would they achieve a 5-year extension?
Well, they have to apply to the Planning and Zoning Commission. For example, if this is a hypothetical example, but if we had a project that was approved and not built and expired and we achieve moratorium status in that intervening time, then that may be grounds not to renew an application. But if there's no significant change in the landscape, we'd be back into an appeal process likely if there were a denial of that. So it's generally a 5 to 10 year time span.
Thank you. The next question is from the minority leader of the RTM, Pamela Iacono. We discussed the Affordable Housing Committee, but can you explain what the Housing Authority Board is and how that is different from the Affordable Housing Commission, and additionally, the connection between or not the Housing Authority Corporation and the Housing Authority Board? Mark Barnhart. Can you answer that one? Are you unmuting?
I am.
Okay, you're good.
I'll do my best. Well, the Housing Authority is a separate entity established by state statute, so it's independent of the town, although I believe the first selectwoman or board of selectmen have appointment authority to the Fairfield Housing Authority, as do other municipal leaders for their housing authorities in their respective communities. But it does exist independent of the town. It's an independent entity established under state statutes. They do have some authorities granted under the statutes to act as a manager, developer, operator of housing, which is their function. You know, I don't know the particulars of the Housing Authority Corporation, but it's not uncommon for nonprofit entities to create development entities to further their mission to own and develop specific projects. In addition to that, typically a lot of these projects that have an affordable housing component to them are financed through different governmental programs. One of the most popular is the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit, which is a federal program, provides financing to further the development of affordable housing. And how that typically works is a nonprofit or governmental entity will make an application for an allocation of housing tax credits. Those tax credits are applied to an investor. The investor gets the benefit of those tax credits, which goes against their federal tax obligations that are spread out over a 10-year period of time. So this is a public-private partnership typically. The investor or the for-profit entity that gets the benefit of the tax credits over a 10-year period is part of the ownership structure of the project. They're typically a minority partner, and then the nonprofit developer or the owner of the project managing entity is the one that actually develops and manages the units. But because they're nonprofit, they can't take advantage of the tax credits themselves, but what they do is through the syndication process, they sell the tax credits and raise equity that helps cover the cost of developing the project. So again, this is a common form that housing authorities and other entities like that use to finance these types of projects, and it's typically done through a partnership between a for-profit and a nonprofit entity.
Does that answer your question, Pam? Thank you. I just want to, thank you, Pam. I just want to say it's about 1:53, and we have a few more, about 5 more questions. The next one is Todd Chandler. I live below the property. There's considerable current water run off that eventually flows into Mill River. Adding about 200 parking spaces and buildings would obviously make this worse. Who or what group in town would look at the environmental impacts to Mill River as a result of such construction? I think Matt Wagner had to go off. Jim, would you like to?
Yeah, Jim can answer that.
Oh, no, Matt's there. Hi, Sam.
I have to leave in a few minutes, but Jim can answer that.
Yeah, any prospective development of this site, or any site for that matter, the developer would have to submit a detailed engineered drainage plan and report to address how they're going to handle the drainage from the facility. That report would get vigorously reviewed by our engineering department staff here. We've got excellent engineers on staff that would make recommendations or weigh in on the veracity of the developer's proposal. I'm just looking quickly. I don't believe, I'm trying to glance at the town's GIS network as I'm talking here. So I don't believe there's any wetlands on this site. If there are wetlands or wetland impacts, that would fall under the purview of the town's Conservation Commission. I don't believe this site has any on-site wetlands, but I'm not the wetlands expert. But in those cases, you know, the environmental review and the impacts on any adjacent wetlands would be thoroughly reviewed by the Conservation or the Inland Wetlands Commission.
Thank you, Jim. And so the next question is from Jim McMahon. I'm going to, Jim, if you're still there, you said you have a question on population and traffic.
Yes. So I spoke to one of your commissioners, and he had mentioned that you or they would be considerate of potential or future development. So if we assume for a second that this 150 unit goes in next door, U.S. Census tells us 2.5 average household population. So that's adding 375 to the population. is 98 units, and that will add another 245 to the population. There's a lesser development on Lower Mill Hill Road that is rumored to be between 20 and 40, we'll call it 30. So that adds 75 to the population of Southport, whose population is 1,621. So we're talking about an increase in the population of 46% within a 1/2 square mile. Also, US says there's 2 cars per household. Now, this may not be the case. Nonetheless, we're looking at between 300 and 600 additional cars on the road in the same half square mile. Then the town has bought giant steps. There's one way in and one way out on Barberry off Mill Hill Road. I'm assuming that you didn't spend $5.5 million for the benefit of solely 39 students. That will be developed at some point. I know you don't have any solid, but there's no question that something at some point will go in there. So the distance between Barberry and Mill Hill Road and the entrance to 461 Mill Hill Terrace is literally can be measured in steps, not eighths of a mile. So we're going to have enormous influx of population, traffic, not inclusive of delivery, of elderly care, of UPS, whatever you want to add into it, on top of visitors. So we're talking multiple hundreds of vehicles on the road in a extremely confined area. There's one way in, one way out of these areas. And I'm just curious is if you're looking at approval for potential development in the area, I have to assume this is relevant to that conversation.
So thank you, Jim. I'm just going to try to quickly answer this because we still have more people that I want to get to, and we are getting close, so I want to make sure that everybody has a chance. Just to be clear, the purchase of giant steps, yes, was a priority for the town, not just to have a permanent location for our alternative high school, but to be very clear, I had in mind to save that property from development, because I was quite sure a developer would have tried to purchase it and overdevelop it. So that was a lot of the reason. The primary reason was for the high school, but again, it was to protect the property, because I know, we all know what happens to big property, and that's almost 12 acres. So I just want to respond to that. Going back to what you were saying, yes, traffic, cars, congestion, overcrowded population. Those are basically the impacts of 8-30G. And they are the result of the statute and the impact it has on our entire community every time an 8-30G development is built. And I mean, I hear the frustration in your voice. I have shared that frustration, as has Laura Devlin, as has Tony Wong, and our delegation and the rest of the legislators in Fairfield County. I mean, I wish we could go back to the videotape, they used to say, the sports shows, but I mean, we have literally filibustered, talked for literally thousands of hours over the last 10 years in committee, in meetings, on the floor of the House. Again, we don't have the votes to overturn this statute, and we don't have the votes to change the statute. So we're all stuck with living under it. So really the conversation is, why is this, it needs to kind of go away from why is this happening? Why is this happening? Because we can still try to fight, but I've been doing it for 10 years, as Laura Devlin and Tony Wong have been fighting, and it hasn't been successful. So the result, like Matt said, on the planning and zoning, all the work they have done, Mark, and the things we can continue to do as a community to try to mitigate and build more units, and with the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, these types of things to kind of to protect ourselves. and reach this moratorium so that we can have more control over our own zoning and our town's destiny. So I just wanted to say that. There's two comments. One from Paul Kiefner, sidewalks mean landowners having to plow them or shovel them. I know that's true. Sidewalks to mitigate traffic safety is not the main issue. Adding more to 350 cars to a residential street, I agree. As far as sidewalk construction goes, are the developers required to install them or contribute to the construction funding as part of their approvals? I think Matt or Jim could answer that. I'm not sure.
We can require a development to provide sidewalks on their property. We cannot require them to do an off-site improvement.
Okay. The next question is from Frank Batiste. He's an RTM member in Southport. As far as sidewalk construction goes, are the developers required to install them? Oh, we just said that. I'm sorry, that was you, Frank. I apologize. The writing's very small. The next one is Craig Metz. My concern is on public safety. This property appears landlocked and only Mill Hill Terrace to leave the only one access point enter when considering the project of this size. Mill Hill Terrace is narrow road, it is, and no sidewalks. An in-depth traffic study needs to be performed. I reside on the corner of the beginning of Mill Hill, and we see multiple accidents on the corner every day. Two school buses cannot pass each other. Please perform a traffic study on the Mill Hill Terrace and speeding accidents on this road. Serious concern to all who have been impacted when it comes to public safety. Please review the traffic accidents through the police reports. Listen, I think that's something that we can have a review by our police commission. And Jim, can you speak to how these traffic studies work into these applications and how they're viewed by the commission?
Sure. Any development of that magnitude or the magnitude that we may anticipate here, the applicant will perform and engage a traffic engineer to do that study. We will have that study reviewed again by our own engineering department, and we can certainly refer that and have in the past referred that to the police department for them to review and offer any comments that they might have. Typically, as part of that is a review of accident data that's filed with the police department. So we can certainly partner with the police department in the review of any traffic report that's submitted as part of this project.
Okay, thank you. The next one is from Melanie Marks. More cars are walking, children in the streets. Recipe for disaster as far as flooding and environmental concerns. Mill River, we've already lived through this when 154 Mill Hill Terrace went in above my house. The developer did not do this due diligence as far as proper drainage, and thus caused flooding in my basement and my neighbors on both sides. This was caused by the one house. What will 100, 200 units do to us, like Matt Chenner living at the bottom of Mill Hill Terrace? Again, I think, Jim, you spoke to about the inland wetland and the Conservation Commission.
Well, it remains to be seen whether the Inland Wetlands Agency would have any jurisdiction on this particular site, but certainly any drainage that's proposed in the engineering plan for any development would be reviewed by our engineering department, and they would have position. I mean, it's not uncommon for preliminary plans to be reviewed. Changes are made as a result of input that's received in that process through the engineering department to get to a point where they believe a plan is satisfactory to their results. And a plan will not go forward, nor would I expect that the Planning and Zoning Commission would embrace a plan that does not have a positive review from our engineering department. So, that is going to be a large part of any review of any potential development, is how the drainage is going to be handled. And if our local engineering department is not satisfied with the way it's designed, I would expect that it would not gain support from the Planning and Zoning Commission.
Thank you, Jim. Mike Roberts and asked me, why don't you buy the property? I'm assuming you mean the town. Actually, I was interested in this property when I heard about it, and actually just received an email just recently from David Brandt from the Aspetuck Land Trust, talking about having they were going to be reaching out to the owners of the property, and they were talking about applying for a grant. And I'm going to set up a conference call with them and the town attorney this week. Again, the town just purchased a large piece of property in Southport for $5 million. Now, yes, it's for a school, but it was also to protect it. I don't know if the town is going to get into the business of trying to purchase every single property. I don't know if the town could afford to purchase every single property in town to try to protect it from 8-30G. We have, when I came into office, I quickly learned that the town had been starved for a number of years. We had a lot of infrastructure projects. The schools had a lot of expensive projects the town has funded over the many years, as they should have, but the town itself, our town infrastructure, has an extraordinarily long list of needs. And we just had our capital planning workshop with our Board of Finance the other night, and we have some serious infrastructure issues that we have to look at. We have a lot of needs, and obviously if I could purchase every single piece of property and take care of all of our infrastructure needs and not bankrupt the town, I would do that. So again, I did get reached out to by the Land Trust, and I'm going to set up a conference call with them, the town attorney, and let's see, who knows, maybe there's a possibility here. So stay tuned. Melanie Bulgaria, how will the school accommodate the increased number of potential students? It's currently being built at 441 capacity. I don't know if Nick Ace is still on the line. I know someone asked for them to be on. That's probably why. Nick, Nick Ace, are you still on the line?
No, Brenda, he actually texted me to let me know that he had to hop off for work. But if anybody wants to email him, he'd be happy to try and answer their question.
Okay, obviously, listen, you know, there was discussions over the time when the school was going to be renovated. Should they build it bigger? And there was a lot of debate. I was in the legislature at the time. You know, obviously the school system will have to, just like in any other part of this town, this has been brought up when other developments have been proposed. How is the school going to cover it? I think, Jim, you said there was some kind of report on.
Well, I can tell you just our experience with other projects. And as I said before, unfortunately, you know, school capacity or the impact on a school system is not an acceptable standard or concern under the statute under legal cases. But just an example, the Housing Authority's project fairly recently completed, Pine Tree project. And again, this is speculative because we don't know what the bedroom counts are going to be in any type of project. But the Pine Tree is 50 units, and that has 7 children currently enrolled in the school system out of those 50 units. So it's not, we haven't seen a huge influx of kids per unit in these types. The other, you know, 130 Fairchild Avenue is a 54 unit project, has no kids. That's not a fair comparison. I mean, those are all mainly 1 bedroom and studio units. So it really is going to depend on the mix of bedroom and unit sizes. But Pine Tree is a mix of 1, 2, and 3 bedroom units, has 50 units and only 7 kids. Does that mean that another project is going to have more or less impact? You know, not necessarily, but we do track town-wide all multifamily units of 10 or more units with school enrollment, and our numbers have consistently showed that multifamily units of multiple size have far fewer kids per unit than does a single-family house. So does that mean there won't be kids in the school system? Absolutely not. But that impact is not one that the commission, the Planning and Zoning Commission, can hang their hat on as a potential reason to deny an application.
Thank you, Jim. Kelly Kerrigan, has anyone from the town spoken to the bishop about the sale of the Mill Hill Terrace property in hopes of getting him to support the town's concerns? I actually was under the impression that it was owned by the Episcopal Church. Is that not accurate? And just to say that no, the town, I know Mark had some dialogues with the owner early on when we were talking about this property when it came up for sale. Mark, do you want to elaborate on that?
Yes, First Selectwoman, it is the Episcopal Church, but there is a bishop that ultimately has some decision-making authority in their hierarchy. We have had some conversations with the Episcopal Church previously as it relates to potential development opportunities. Those conversations continue or are ongoing. But we did indicate before, relative to a previous application, or at least there was some consideration that we were more supportive of traditional residential development as opposed to a higher density type project. So, you know, the town has expressed some concerns in the past as it relates to the property.
So we're coming close to our stop time. There's one, could you briefly repeat which groups need to be engaged to mount evidence about the issues with overdevelopment, specifically sewer, drainage, traffic, fire safety, water supply? Well, the Planning and Zoning Commission obviously reviews these proposals or these applications with all those things in mind. Do you, Jim, do you just want to jump in and give a quick, so I can get to the rest of these other questions?
Yeah, there'll be multiple, before an application is even submitted to the Planning and Zoning Commission, we will have an internal review amongst all the various regulatory agencies. But just going down quickly this list, the sewer capacity is regulated by the Water Pollution Control Authority, which is a board in town that will render judgment as whether there's adequate sewer capacity for the project. Drainage, and the others are correct. Drainage, town engineering, traffic would be a co-review with the police department. Fire safety would be the fire marshal's office. And we have had reviews in the past through the fire department operations to make sure the plan is sufficient for them to be able to access the site. Water supply, if it's public water, that would be Bridgeport or Aquarion, formerly known as Bridgeport Hydraulic Company. So those are the groups that would need to review all these pieces to the puzzle.
And would that be the zoning commission that engages them, or zoning group that engages them, or is that on the residents to kind of them and get them to kind of oppose the application?
Well, I think by and large, it's going to be the applicant that will be responsible to engage those folks initially. It will be an internal review amongst the town agencies. The applicant would have to engage with Aquarion to demonstrate adequate water capacity, but the others are going to be an internal review. But typically that's, you know, if there are issues that an agency in the first passive review, for example, if the fire department has an access issue, then the developer would have to work with them to do that, you know, to satisfy those concerns. So it's kind of an ongoing process once a plan is put on the table. But in all of those things, all of those reports and comments filter into the Planning and Zoning Commission's review of a project with feedback from all those agencies.
Thank you.
George Rivera just made well, asked a question, is in Pine Tree Court mainly senior housing? No, actually it's been modified when it went through a renovation, and there was additional units added. We're still going back and forth with the state to get the additional units counted toward our stock, but it has, it's mixed use. So it's senior and family housing at Pine Tree now. The next question from Mike. He says, we have the money as the town to purchase this. This is a private residential neighborhood, and we shouldn't have this here. I agree. I know we can't buy every property in town, please understand that we vote people into office who represent us as residents and taxpayers. I am trying very hard to represent everybody in our community. And so, again, I'm going to have a conversation with David Brandt from the Land Trust, and the town just spent $5 million. And it's not just up to me to purchase these things. These items go through a rigorous process, and they are approved by the Board of Finance and the RTM and the Board of Selectmen. So again, there's a lot to consider. And if, like I said, if we had unlimited amount of money, I would purchase every property that could potentially be developed into an 8-30G and have more control over how our development is happening in our town. I just want to say, for the record, because I know we don't have much time left, but Jim Wendt is always available by email or phone call to answer questions, as is Mark. You have local elected officials, but really this is more of a state statute issue, right? We have been, I know this is new because this is in your neighborhood now, but this is not new to a lot of us who've been fighting this for over 10 years in every single corner of our town. Many neighborhoods have had to deal with this, this 8-30G statute. So I'm going to just open it up quick to Senator Wong and Representative Devlin if they want to talk a little bit about the process in the state. Today was opening day. They got sworn in for the new term. Congratulations. We're grateful to have you. So if you want to jump in and speak a little bit about the state statute, that might be helpful.
Well, thanks, Brenda. We just session, and I appreciate. This is Tony Huang. I just wanted to offer the fact that the challenge is to get the community as a whole involved in understanding the 830G statute. And I would simplify it by saying this. The debate's going to be about the state dictating that land use and zoning control rests with the state, not with local. And I think the second component of this debate is, that was articulated by many others of the neighbors, is personal property rights. The fact that you buy into a 1-acre zone and base that premise that the state, through this 830G statute, can unilaterally change that into a 150-unit high-density housing. That's the real argument from a state level. The third component is the community through your RTM and through the town leadership sending a loud and clear message that as we support affordable housing, that there is a proper place for it that is consistent with the community and traffic safety and density. All the points that are being raised here, we need to have the town's leadership and articulation to say to that this is not a proper and safe decision that's going to impact our property. And the community will have my utmost support, and we will have that debate in the Planning and Development Committee in the General Assembly that will begin this year. But to me, it's simple. It's about personal property rights and our local control and input in land use and zoning. Thank you, Brenda.
Thank you, Senator Wong. Representative Devlin, do you have anything you'd like to add?
I do. Thank you so much. Sorry I got in here a little bit late. I had trouble connecting, and it was opening day, so we're still in Hartford. But Brenda, you characterized really well the reticence and resistance of many legislators in Hartford to make any changes to the 830G statute. But what's going to be interesting this session is, and as Tony said, you are going to be hearing about this, and please be proactive. We will share information with Tony as the ranking member in Planning and Development. Kristen McCarthy-Vahey is one of the chairs of that committee. There is significant legislation that is a priority for the majority in Hartford. Tony recently did a Zoom meeting with somebody from Cost. There was somebody from Westport. I can't remember who else. It was incredibly informative about this legislation, and I know he'll be doing more of those kinds of forums. So I would just ask Tony if you would maybe share that link either to Jen so she can send it out to everybody who has been on this call. But it's going to be important that, we'll do our part to share as much as we can, but please, stay engaged in understanding what is going to be happening this session. And the details are going to be important. So that's, what I would offer at this time.
Laura, thank you. And Brenda and Jen, I will definitely follow up when we get back from Hartford, that link and detail as well. Thank you.
Thank you. And good luck, guys, up in the legislature this term. I don't envy you. So if anybody, again, if, oh wait, someone just said.
Question here from Jim, and then there's a question down here.
Hold on. Another question is to put Hartford, how well the regulation is doing getting affordable housing units built, more results. Absolutely. Yes, that is something we have brought up ad nauseum up in Hartford, that there are other ways to build more affordable housing that isn't so punitive to communities and really honestly allows developers to take advantage of the statute and to provide only a very small amount of affordable units. Frankly, we have said for years that we wanted more affordable units to be included in it, but that hasn't worked. Nothing really that we ask or have proposed has been amendable. So let's see.
Question from Jim up here.
Jim McMahon, let me just ask the other ones. Hold on. Question Hereford. Last question to clarify earlier in the call. It sounds like there's no conflict of interest with Carol being the executive director of the Fairfield Housing Authority and Carol potentially also being the private developer. I don't know the role of Carol when you mean private developer. I think maybe Mark could speak more about this, or maybe you could send this out. I know that I don't know her role. I think this came up during the High Street discussion. People felt like there was a conflict of interest, but my understanding is, like you said, Mark, this is a state mandated housing authority, but she also is the housing corp, or a member or a principal. Yeah,
I don't know precisely, again, the respective roles, but all I was saying before was that it's not uncommon. The housing authority's mission is to own, operate, manage, and develop housing for the needs of our residents, affordable housing. So in that respect, it's clearly consistent with their overall arching mission. In addition to that, it's not uncommon for housing authorities to establish a nonprofit development corporation to actually perform the work of developing a property. So I don't know the precise roles as you indicated, but what I do know is it's not uncommon for housing authorities to have a nonprofit development corporation established for the purpose of developing a specific piece of property. That's not uncommon.
Okay, a question from Dina, which I'm going to recommend, if you wouldn't mind emailing Senator Wong directly, is how will HB 5132 affect existing statutes? If you wouldn't mind emailing Senator Wong directly, because again, he's on that committee. And then I think I want to go back to someone, Jim McMahon asked, there's a quick question on AA zoning. Jim, are you still on the line?
Yes, thank you. And please, I don't mean snide here, but going off of what Tony said on our property rights, for individual property rights, for this purpose, we are essentially ignored. And town may have one leg to stand on barely to combat something like this. So 21 years ago, when we bought this house, we essentially signed a contract with the town of Fairfield to abide by the AA zoning law. And for that privilege, we pay some of the highest real estate taxes in the state, rather even the country. So maybe even assume that this project goes in, we are then not a AA zone any longer. And should we, everyone on this call and everyone in a AA zone that's affected by 830G, apply to have our home values reassessed and hence our real estate tax bill decrease, because there's not a soul in the state of Connecticut that is going to tell me that all of our properties are worth more. And if a 150 unit development went in, and rentals at that. So I think that's a very fair question, that we pay an extraordinarily real estate tax for the privilege to live in a AA zone, but effectively will not be a AA zone. And I personally will go in, request reassessment.
So Jim, again, I just want to go back. I know that it's frustrating, and I know that you're frustrated that you feel you made a contract with the town of Fairfield, and that we somehow are abdicating our commitment to the town. But again, this is a state statute that we have no choice. Our planning and zoning has no choice but to accept certain proposals that meet the criteria of the statute, or face spending a tremendous amount of money in court to defend the town against a decision which many times we've lost, and we've lost those appeals. So again, this is from the state, and I don't like it any better than you do. I did learn about the revaluation, because we're going through that right now, that residents do have the opportunity or ability to appeal their tax bill, not just during revals like normal people, and I didn't even know this, but I just found this out. So typically people apply for an appeal process right after the reval to dispute their current revaluation that's mandatorily obligated every 5 years. However, I guess residents do have the opportunity to do that throughout the year. So I think the answer to your question is you could do that.
Thank
Brenda, if I may, just to maybe leave on a positive note for everybody, is the fact that right now, 461 Mill Hill Terrace is not an 830G application. I think we have momentum, possibly with the town, the community, and the state delegation, to make sure that that property is not sold as an 830G project. So we have an opportunity to fend this off and to look at, and I'm really encouraged that the Aspetuck Land Trust is in conversation with the town to maybe collaborate, to look at getting grants. You will have my commitment, and I can't speak for Laura, to be able to try to locate money to help the community. I want to leave on a positive note, because this deal is not an 830G right now, because if it is, you know the challenges we're going to be confronted with. We can still head this off in a united front to say to the diocese and the bishop, sell this land, not for the 830G project. We still have an opportunity to fight that fight. And I would encourage people to be united for the whole town to say, this could happen to your neighborhood next. You've got to have a voice. So I hope that helps in the point of really laser focus what we need to do right now, and that is to persuade the diocese to sell it to an entity that is going to be respectful of property rights in the community.
You know, Tony, we were able to do that with the school proposed in Greenfield Hill as well. So a real good suggestion.
Can I add one thing? This is George Yovasaya. Is there a way that we can get a copy?
A what? I'm sorry?
Copy of what?
A copy of the gifted document sent to the church, right? Whoever sold, gifted the property to the church. Maybe there's a different, like, additional amendments in there that, therefore, if at one point we look to sell the property, the church sells the property, it can only sell to a X or another church or whatever, not for profit.
Mark, can you I know we talked a little bit about this several months ago when we heard it was coming up and or could potentially be coming on the market. Do you remember if there is there something that we could even get a hold of, that some language that it might
I'm sure
be
we
part of
can. Sure, I can discuss that with Attorney Baldwin, and between the two of us, we can probably get that information.
Thank you.
Okay, I thought that you actually had referred to something like that back, but maybe I might have misunderstood.
I don't have the actual physical document, but I didn't do a title search on the property.
Okay, Melanie Marks is saying in the comments that I have the property records from she did a title search on the property. Melanie, if you want to share that with me, and I can share it with the group.
Brenda, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
I figured it would just be easier since there's a lot of people questioning. I did the title search for this property out of, after speaking with Bruce, because I really wanted to understand the property and everything. I can assure you that the property was gifted by a member of Trinity Church in Southport to the Episcopal Diocese of Connecticut. And that's what I think everyone needs to understand. It's not just the Episcopal Church, it's the Diocese of Connecticut that owns the property now. And I pulled all the probate records. Kate Maxim, Judge Maxim, was wonderful to send me everything via COVID, so I didn't have to go in. The language in the probate records, and I think it was Article 11, which was gifting it to the diocese, was to establish a retirement home for retired ministers and their wives. That's what her sole purpose and intent was for this property. And there was no written anything in the language that says that if by any reason the diocese feels there is no need for housing for retired, clergy and their families, then they could do whatever they want with it. There's nothing. I searched that as soon as I got in touch with Bruce, when I got the letter in my mailbox that this was going to be happening. So I wish there was. I wish that Mrs. Berg would have said, if you don't need it for this purposes, then I gift it to the town of Fairfield to do whatever they want to, open space, whatever. But in 1966, that didn't happen.
Thank you, Melanie. And I know that when Mark and I spoke about this a while back, he thought that they may be viewing an affordable housing, from the Fairfield Housing Authority, providing housing for underprivileged people would be something along the lines of the mission of the church and be acceptable to their, I guess, mission. When we had talked about—
I agree with, if you're looking at the structures that are on the property now, you've got 3 small houses. We're now looking at 150 to 200 unit complex. That's a big difference. And I'm not opposed to affordable housing. I'm not opposed to any of it. I just don't think that this is, the massing for our neighborhood is just out of whack for what they're proposing. And I know it's not it's not indefinite yet. You have no application, but if we don't stay proactive on these things now in the beginning, and we wait until an application comes in, there's nothing we can do about it. So I think we need to prey on the conscience of the Episcopal Diocese to see what should be right. And in honoring Mrs. Berg's request of, this is what her intent was back then, I think she would be mortified if she knew that 150, 200 unit housing complex was going to go on her estate, which she so cared about. So at least that's what I could read through the records in her will. So that's all I can say.
Melanie, I just want to be clear. I didn't mean that I thought that this was appropriate. I'm saying they may be.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know this for a fact, but they may be viewing this in a positive nature as opposed to just, the housing authority whose mission is to build affordable housing, as opposed to, say, just a developer who just is building, a small amount of affordable units. So I just wanted to say, I think that's maybe in line with their sort of charitable thing.
Correct.
And when I thought about the
agree.
town, when I thought about the town purchasing it, I wanted to potentially look to partner with a developer to build some affordable units there. Obviously, not 200. But again, so I know we are past our deadline, and I just want to again remind everybody, please reach out to your state legislators if you have any questions on any bills or statutes or 8-30G, and you can communicate with myself or Mark Barnhart or Jim Wentz or our planning, your neighbor, Matt Wagner, who's our chairman on the zoning commission. And I will,
Brenda, can I ask just one question, Brenda?
Okay, 1 minute. I want to send out, I will send out information on an update of my conversations. Obviously, this is going to be a preliminary conversation with the land trust. I don't know how far along the housing authority is in their deliberations or negotiations or anything. Like I said, I think I spoke to some of you that Carol Martin did reach out to myself and Mark Barnhart to say that they were interested in this property, and that, but they don't have a signed contract to my knowledge. I think they're in negotiations. So again, the town will try to do what we can, and let's see where we are. But again, reach out to any of us if you have any questions. And Melanie, go ahead. You had one more question?
It was just that I know we don't have an application right now. I'm assuming that someone will contact Bruce, who is kind of overseeing this group, neighborhood group, when and if an application does come across zoning's desk.
Yes, I have Jim. I don't know that I have Bruce's contact information. Bruce, would you mind calling the office today and ask to give your email address to Jennifer? It's 256-3030, First Select Woman's office. And if you just reach out to Jennifer in my office and give her your contact information.
Hi, Brenda, this is Carolyn's wife. He just stepped out for a moment, but I will relay the information to him.
Okay, thank you.
No
thank
problem.
you very much. Well, thank you, everyone. And I know this is a frustrating experience. I've been through this with so many neighborhoods over the last 10 years. I get it. I know the frustration levels are high. And I will try to do with everything within my power and within reason to try to be helpful to your neighborhood.
Thank you, Brenda.
Thank you, Brenda.
Thank you,
very
everyone.
much.
Thank you, Brenda.
Take care.
Yep.
Take care,
Thanks
everyone.
all. Bye-bye.